What up, everybody? Good morning. So I did do my last video and I discussed that how I'm not going to be talking about the virus for 2 weeks, and that still stands. However, this video more so is talking about the economics of it all. Like the last video that, and I'm not going to stop talking about the state or definitely economics. It's not going to stop. It's just more so the direct virus is not. I'm not going to be discussing that for 2 weeks. A little social experiment, but I will be discussing this today for this video because I did do the last video and I talked about the inconsistencies, certainly when it comes to like socialism or socialistic policies, when depending on who it's like put out there by, and like if they are, let's say, Republicans wanting to endorse a more socialistic ideal, it's okay. They'll make excuses. They will make exceptions for it. So this kind of goes into that, and I have, which is what I end the video with. I have sort of this overall point that I do want to make. But long story short, as to be expected, Nancy Pelosi and company are announcing the Take Responsibility for Workers and Families Act. And this is their counter offer to what it is that the Republicans put out there. So whereas the Republicans spent, or it was like a 1.8 trillion dollar plan, this is 2.5 trillion. And it has some of the other elements of it, and we'll talk about the cash in a little bit. It just expands it. As you can see here, we put money in the pockets of individuals and families, provides Americans with a direct cash infusion of $1,500 of immediate assistance per individual, up to $7,500 for a family of 5. So similar thing, you get bonuses if you have children, of course. But the starting point is it was $1,200 and $2,400, I believe, for a couple. $1,200 for an individual. This is $1,500 for an individual. So they added a little more, and then they added a little more that you can earn as well. Now, one of the biggest things that's different about that cash portion, which is more so what I want to talk about with the video, is that it expands to everybody, whereas in the GOP bill, by the time you hit 99,000, 98 or 99,000 in terms of your income, and this was based off of 2018, tax return, if I'm not mistaken. So if you were out of a job now, it doesn't really matter. Or if you made even 100,000, because for whatever reason, people think that the only people that are suffering that are suffering are people that don't make a lot of money, as if you can't get laid off and have a 6-figure job. I guess people don't believe that exists. Nonetheless, whereas it was completely phased out, you just didn't get anything. 99,000 by individual, and I forget 100, almost 200,000. 999, I think 199,000 or 198,000, excuse me. It was, by then it was completely phased out. So it was like 5% knock on everything after 75,000 as an individual. And if you do the math, that's pretty much what it amounts to. By the time you get to right under 100,000, you will have had that $1,200 or whatever you could earn completely phased out. Whereas with this bill, they're saying that you can get it regardless. Now, the biggest difference is that, and by get it regardless, as long as you have a tax identification number, you get access to this no matter if you're rich or poor. Funny to the people that generally are against socialism and said that it was okay for the GOP to do what it is that they did. And they try to rationalize with it by saying you're getting your own money back, right? Which is simply not true. They have more of a leg to stand on with the Democrats bill because they're leaving this open to everybody. Now, granted, I think that's a false premise anyway, but you'd have more of a leg to stand on with their bill than you do the Republicans. We're going to talk about that a little more in a bit. But if you actually read the bill, which I will actually put in the description box, I don't think I put it in there my last video, but I'm going to put it in the description box. Of course, there's always a catch to if you do make that. So what they're saying is if you make above 75,000, you still get it, but you may owe money in that regards. So what they're saying is, and if I kind of lost my place. Let me, yes, here we go. There's a treated like an advance, and this is also based on the 2020 tax return, where there's this reduction and there's a recapture, spread to recapture over 3 years. So what it's saying is if you met that requirement, which is like 75,000 for 75,000, if you make at least 75 or over 75,000 as an individual, 112,000 or a little over as a head of household, then you're basically expected over the 3 years to pay that money back. So everybody under that doesn't have to pay it back. So you'll get the advance, you get the money, but you'll have to pay it back. Everybody over, so you're not really. It's basically a no interest loan, is what they're giving you in the event that you get the money and make over that amount. Everybody under that amount just gets the money and it's fine. There's no payback or anything of that nature. So that's a very interesting case there. So take of that, whatever it is that you made. It does double down on a lot of the adjustments. They even talk about some of that here. It does double down on some of the adjustments that, or what the the GOP was proposing. It just expands on a lot of it and so forth. There's still sort of corporate welfare elements. We didn't really talk about that. And the last video is still that element of corporate welfare is still there. It's just if you get the grant, you have to pay like a certain amount of money, like a $15 minimum wage in some cases if you are receiving like federal grants and stuff of that nature. So they're telling you how you kind of got to operate your business if you spend it. It's actually almost, textbook. You were getting closer to fascism than anything, but that's neither here nor there. The point of this video, guys, a lot of people butthurt about that last video, because nobody wants to look at it from the standpoint of consistency. Principles go out of the window in the case of what they deem as an emergency. And quite often it's a case where they cause the issue. Like right now, we're dealing with a case where they cause the issue and forcing people to shut things down. And certainly in regards to things that they, not necessarily the federal government, but state governments, definitely in regards to things that they deem as non-essential. Imagine telling somebody that their job is not essential, by the way. But and this is how it always works. This is why I love how Malice says that a lot of Republicans are just Democrats, conservatives, or progressives going the speed limit. Because all the Democrats did, has to be expected. They're going to push back just because that's sort of how it happens, right? It's an opposing party. They're going to push back. Your bill doesn't go far enough. And even if the GOP, which they may or may not do, came back and said, okay, we're going to, instead of 2.5 trillion, we're going 2.6 trillion, the Democrats will continue to one-up them. Never mind that the money's coming out of thin air, right? Selling off assets of the unborn. Federal Reserve allows them to do that. They can spend money, and I think it actually talks about some of the what the Federal Reserve. God, these guys treat the state as if it's Jesus or God or their God. I think it's subject to not subject to the economic laws. Like there's going to be no economic consequence to this or anything like that. It's like the money's coming out of thin air. Everything's fine. Everything's fine. There's going to be no short or long-term effect because of this. Just kicking the can down the road And now, never mind if we enter into a depression or worse off depression than what it could. I mean, Burber's was going to bust either way it went. I mean, can't keep on this pace of spending they're $23 trillion in worth of debt, and it's deficit spending still to this day. You can't continue to do that and just see no sort of no economic consequence. But the main point is that you have absolutely no leg to stand on if you're going to be in opposition to wealth redistribution, socialism, and stuff like that. The reason why it's so key in moments like this to stay consistent, and this is my message to conservatives who generally have the right idea, but they'll throw it out the window in the event of an emergency, or in the event that it's their guy proposing it. Like, again, just not too long ago, when Obama's stimulus packages, as well as Obama taxing Chinese tires and Chinese goods, they were afraid of trade wars. They were afraid of all of that. They thought that the economic stimulus was indicative of the socialistic efforts, and now that goes out the window because it is their guys. You don't have a leg to stand on when you start proposing things like that, and then the Democrats one up you. You have absolutely nothing to stand. You don't. Because at what point in time does it become, well, that's a little too much? Says who? If you stood on principle and you were like, okay, this is not right, we should not be telling people how to operate, definitely for something like this. We should not be telling people how to operate and so forth. Get to work. And again, we're not going to go into too much detail with all of that. We'll talk about that in 2 weeks. Or make the decision, not necessarily get to work, make the decision for yourself. Be responsible for yourself. But if you have state governments causing more issues, and then people are sitting here like peasants, like, I need the money, right? This is what happens. This is exactly what happens, and you get what you deserve. You have nothing to stand on. You cannot oppose it. And of course, they're going to throw in other stuff. If you actually read throughout the rest of the bill, they're going to throw in other stuff and going to be, of course, funding things that you disagree with. But you have nothing to stand on because you were supporting a bill that was doing the same thing, just to a lesser degree. To a lesser degree, they just one-upped you. They just one-upped you. They said, you know what? Doesn't go far enough. Not socialist enough. Why don't we go over here? We give them this much money. And I want to be clear about something. I know there was like in the last video, it's not socialism because the state is forcing people not to work and stuff like that. That completely disregards, which I think I did actually mention in this video, what happened with the USSR, what's happened even in if you want to talk about Pol Pot in Cambodia, but certainly with the USSR, that's the more prominent recent example of exactly this happening. Even Nazi Germany, right? Even Nazi Germany, they don't want to say that that's socialist. They hate when you say the Nazis were socialist, but that's what happened too. It's that that's what happens. It's, where that fascism is more of a, unfortunately, people that have these educational elites have hijacked a political spectrum, and they've put the fascists to the right and the communists to the left, where I would put them more accurately on the same exact side, considering that it is just more of a nationalistic form of socialism. That's all fascism is, just a nationalistic form of socialism. If you look at the more international form of socialism like USSR, and then you look at Nazi German model socialism, where it's this sort of quasi, okay, you're allowed to operate as a business, but you have to operate the way that we say that you have to operate. The state says that you have to operate. You only can operate among this business, among this sort of, business model, paying the workers this much. So where they control everything. And if you're obviously a part of their party, in the case of Nazi Germany, that's how it worked. In the case of the USSR, this is exactly how they ended up with shortages, overages, and all of that. State dictates what it is, what industries are, let's say, essential, right? What industries are essential, and they then dictate how they're going to run it, right? Never mind working on farms and all of this stuff. workers state-owned farms. I know. Oh yeah, I forgot. People hate my air quotes. Oh well, I don't care. But that's what we're crossing into. Well, I don't want to say that's what we're crossing into. It's sort of where we've already been. It's just being sort of accelerated because and magnified because of what's going on around us. But this is my video more so for the people that generally would be in opposition to something like this, but they just threw the principle out the window. This is what happens. You don't have a leg to stand on. You can be mad at me all you want. I'm just giving you the facts. You don't have a leg to stand on in the event that you support it when they do it, when your guys do it. And then the counter side says, no, we want to do it more. Well, you already supported the act in itself. So what do you have to stand on? Nothing. Just some arbitrary, well, that's a little too much. It goes a little too hard. It's arbitrary. Says who? You? Where you could have stood on principle and said this was wrong in the first place. Oh, and then, I didn't finish my last point. Sorry. The socialistic efforts, when it doesn't negate the socialistic efforts because the state has shut down certain businesses. And then they want to give people, let's say, cash payments or fund this, and that, no matter how, whether it be stealing from people or stealing assets of people, be it in like rich people, future assets of the unborn, or printed out of thin air, which kind of goes with the latter. But regardless, that's part of socialism, right? That's why I mentioned the USSR. That doesn't negate the socialistic effort because that I would argue that it actually highlights it. Because that happened, because they did that, it highlights that. Because I would argue that's almost a prerequisite when it comes to the state socialism and state dictating how people must spend their money or how people must work, what industries they can work in, and so forth. Again, we saw this not just with more nationalistic forms of socialism, especially in Nazi Germany or Mussolini, who's a former Marxist. Not a former Marxist, he was a Marxist, excuse me. Mussolini and the fascist party of Italy or anything that they did, both the international and nationalist socialists did exactly this. To the degree that they controlled industry, they dictated what people could do, and then try to, compensate people based on whatever it is that they, whatever it is they forced or whatever it is they moved away from when it came to strict private ownership of goods and services, or in this case, my means. All I'm encouraging you guys to do is to pay attention to what it is that you support. And I know it's the most difficult time to stay principled when there is a crisis, whether we feel like it's been manufactured in some sense. We'll save that for a little bit. I'm not going into too much detail. But, at least not now. Wait it out. But if you stay principled, you'd have a leg to stand on in opposition when your enemy does something. You can say, that's wrong, this is why. But this is why these types, these leftists, I try to argue the Republicans are leftists too, but these guys, why they have no problem saying, well, what about more roads? What about this? What about taxpayer funding this? What about the state controlling this? What about this? What about that? They continue to erode on people's or impede on people's private property rights and so forth. This is why Hayek says exactly that emergencies are generally used to, erode individual liberty. That's what we're seeing here. They'll take control, tell you what you can, what you can't do, and the enemy gets the same power, or you have opened the floodgates, the enemy is going to make it worse. That's what happens. Stay principled. I know it's difficult, but stay principled.